We're grateful to have you all here with us and excited for tonight's conversation about our budget decisions and well-being. Many of you know the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, but I do want to share a little bit about our work. We envision a state where every person can reach their full potential and achieve well-being through the support of trustworthy anti-racist institutions and systems that we all participate in building. We pay particular attention to budget and tax policy with the idea that these are exciting and tremendous levers that we have as a community to make sure that people have what they need and are well in every spot in our state. So budget choices matter. Many of you have likely been hearing a lot about funding decisions and government funding decisions. Federal funding is very much front and center right now. And so just wanted to start by focusing here on how important federal funding has been to North Carolina. It provides programs and services in 100 counties. It levels the playing field for our state relative to states across the country. When federal funding is available, our state is able to access opportunities, and our state lawmakers are encouraged to make decisions that keep us in line with what's happening in other places across the country. And federal funding also ensures that individual households and families can meet the basics. We know in this moment that so many North Carolinians are struggling with rising costs for childcare, housing, groceries, and that work is not paying a wage that allows them to keep up with those rising costs. And so our focus is on how do we make sure that our budget choices really align with people's priorities. And I'm here tonight with some breaking news, some challenging news for us all, I think, in this effort to make sure that our public dollars are really meeting people's priorities. I'm here to share that the US House has released a plan that would move us in the opposite direction. They're voting this week and next on a budget plan that would take away health insurance and food assistance from hundreds of thousands of North Carolinians, that would leave out many children from the benefits of a child tax credit that provides income into the household for the expenses of growing up. These proposals are really damaging to people's day-to-day lives. They create new barriers to opportunity and reduce the ability of people to keep up with the costs of living. So you may ask, why? Why would this be happening? The reason is that House Republicans are proposing these deep cuts to health insurance and food assistance to pay for tax cuts for people with incomes in the top 1%. So these tax cuts are cost 1.1 trillion in a given period, and that means that they're looking to offset the cost of those tax breaks with these cuts to health insurance and food assistance. And they're incredibly unpopular cuts. We know that. We know across the state, people are sharing their concerns about what will happen to their families, their neighbors, healthcare providers, retailers when health insurance and food assistance is cut at this steep level. But one of the things that Congress is looking to do is to push these unpopular cuts down to the states. And they're doing that by requiring states to, for the first time ever, for example, share in the cost of funding food benefits. North Carolina, under the US House plan, would have to find between 146 million and up to $740 million each year to cover the cost of food assistance. And if the state failed to do so, would receive fewer federal funds for families across North Carolina. So we think it's critical at this moment that we communicate loud and clear that we will not in North Carolina accept taking away the healthcare and food assistance of our neighbors in order to fund tax breaks for the wealthiest few. Here is an action that you can take to call on Congress. Our delegation has critical roles in this debate, both at the House and Senate level. To call on them to say no cuts to our care and that they must put North Carolinians first in any budget proposal that they move forward. So with that, I want to say this moment is such a timely moment to be talking about our public funding and how our public funding can advance well-being. I think you'll hear a lot of challenge that we're in a challenging moment as well, a moment when public funding is not being driven to the priorities people have. But we're excited to be in community with you and to think strategically about how we move forward a vision where every person has what they need and we come together to fund the priorities we have as a community and as a state. I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Sally Hodges-Koppel, who's a public policy analyst with the Budget and Tax Center, to share more about our work around a well-being budget framework and to share more in depth about the state budget proposals that we're seeing right now.
Thanks, Alexandra. So as Alexandra mentioned, we at the Budget and Tax Center, along with partners, are working to advance this vision of a state budget that puts the well-being of North Carolinians first. So instead of prioritizing tax cuts for the wealthy few and for corporations, we expect to see budget proposals that match the priorities that North Carolinians have articulated for more funding for public education, for childcare, for affordable housing. We expect evidence-based proposals that really have strong support from research and from community experience with a proven track record in delivering rather than promises of growth or well-being that never materialize through tax cuts. And we expect proposals that make our tax code more equitable instead of exacerbating our current upside-down tax code that hits low-income North Carolinians the hardest. We also expect in this framework a process that is transparent and inclusive, where the public, North Carolinians, can meaningfully participate in the budget development process. Every lawmaker has a chance to participate, to fully read documents before they have to vote on it, rather than the opaque, closed-door rush process that we've all become used to in recent years. So that's kind of what we mean when we talk about this well-being framework and how we want to be thinking about and evaluating proposals as they emerge, whether from the governor or from the legislature. So with that, we can go to the next slide. I think might have a duplicate slide in there. Yes, okay. So to recap where we are in the process right now, back in February, the consensus revenue forecast was released, and this basically is just an estimate of how much revenue lawmakers will have to work with as they put together our 2-year budget. And this year's forecast was important and concerning because it projects that revenue is going to decline from the first year of the budget to the second year. And that decline is really unusual to happen in a context when you have a growing state population, a growing economy, and the forecast attributes that decline entirely to scheduled tax cuts that are already current law, reductions in the personal income tax rate and the corporate income tax rate that are scheduled for the next several years. So that's the source of that decline. And then going out beyond the next 2 years, 5-year projections actually show a structural deficit emerging in our state budget, where our annual revenues each year will not be enough to sustain the current level of state services given inflation and population growth. So because of that alarming projection, the governor's recommended budget, released in March, called for pausing those scheduled tax cuts and keeping the corporate income tax rate and the personal income tax rate at their current rates to address that structural deficit and to maintain services, make investments, even if it wasn't as much investment as folks wanted to see in certain areas. Um, in mid-April, we then saw the North Carolina Senate release their budget proposal, which I'm about to go into more detail in a second here. But instead of hitting pause, changing course, protecting North Carolinians, that budget proposal doubles down on tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the rich and make cuts to services that North Carolinians depend on and want greater investment in. Next up, we're expecting the North Carolina House to release their budget proposal and vote on that proposal next week, actually, is what we're anticipating. So that's where we are. And then on the next slide, Alexandra gave us a lot of good context on the federal landscape and how that's impacting our state picture. So I won't say too much there. But given this context of expected federal cost shifts onto state government and the harm and the increased need that that's going to create for North Carolinians in terms of accessing health care and food assistance, we really need a plan from our state lawmakers in this budget development process, and especially from the House and their proposal of how they plan to address those cost shifts, protect North Carolinians from losing health care and food assistance, while also addressing that structural deficit and maintaining current services so that we can eventually get on track to fully fund the well-being budget that North Carolinians actually want, because we know the current services are not at the level that most folks would like to see. Now we can get into the details on the Senate's proposal. Basically, as I said, the Senate, instead of hitting pause on scheduled tax cuts, doubles down. So in the orange line here, this is the corporate income tax rate. The Senate maintains the elimination of that corporate income tax. So it made no changes. Right now, the rate's at 2.25%, already very low. And the Senate keeps current law, which steadily reduces the rate and eventually eliminates that tax entirely in the year 2030. So corporations, large multinational corporations with multi-millions in profits will no longer pay state corporate income tax after that year. With the personal income tax rate in the blue line here, currently at 4.25%, under current law, the solid part of the line, it was already scheduled to go as low as 2.49%. The Senate doubles down in their proposal and eventually takes the personal income tax rate down to just 1.99% as soon as 2031. And this equates to if North Carolina had a personal income tax rate of 1.99% today, our general fund would have $8.7 billion less in state revenue. So as little as we have right now, we would have $8.7 billion less if we had that 1.99% tax rate today. On the next slide, it's important to note that charging ahead with these tax cuts not only leaves us unprepared for federal cost shifts and greater hardship, it also disproportionately benefits the wealthy few in North Carolina. So this chart is showing the impact of charging ahead with those tax cuts by income level. This is corporate income tax, personal income tax combined. So the worst paid North Carolinians in our state who make under $25,000 a year will receive an average tax cut of just $5 next year, going ahead with these cuts, while the top 1% of North Carolinians who make over $774,000 a year will receive an average tax cut of $3,650. So that's what we mean when we say that the benefits of these cuts are disproportionately skewed to the wealthy few. On the next slide, you might be asking, well, how can the Senate afford these cuts at a time like this? Essentially, the Senate pays for these tax cuts for the rich by dropping state spending to a 50-year low relative to our state's wealth. So in this chart, each bar is a fiscal year going back to the 1970s, and each bar represents our state general fund spending, our state budget spending as a percent of our overall state's economy. So it's like as a percent of our whole state's wealth, how much did we spend in our state budget that year? And over the last 50 years, the average has been about 5.75%. But the Senate budget proposal in the first year of the budget would take that down to just 4.29%, and the next year, 4.2%. So historically low. And that might not sound like a big difference, but if the Senate had instead proposed spending up at that dotted blue line at the 50-year average, then we would have an additional $11 billion in our budget next year to spend on things like fully funding Leandro, giving state employees a meaningful, large raise, fully addressing the state health plan. That kind of spending could go a long way to the priorities that people have identified. And they achieve this very low level of spending by doing things like giving raises and budget increases that are less than the rate of inflation. They enact sizable cuts to specific areas of the UNC system and community college budgets. They eliminate the Office of Historically Utilized Businesses, Underutilized Businesses, and the North Carolina Innocence Inquiry Commission. And they also eliminate 850 vacant state employee jobs that are vacant in essential departments that are understaffed, and vacant because those positions pay too low and have difficulty recruiting, and not because they're not important positions. So this budget puts us on a path of doing less for North Carolinians over time. And then on the next slide, the Senate's tax plan would also make the structural imbalance in our state budget even worse. So in the orange bars here, that's the amount of revenue we would need in each of those years to sustain our current level of service spending, which is already inadequate, but that's what we would need to sustain our current level of spending. The darker blue bar is the revenue we expect to have under current law. So already under current law, the revenue we expect is less than what we need to sustain current services. Whereas the Senate plan and the light blue bar would take us even lower, have an even bigger gap between what we need to sustain services and what we would bring in under continued deeper tax cuts for the rich. As far as what's next in the budget process, on the next slide, this week we learned additional details about the federal cuts, which Alexandra shared. Again, next week we expect to see the North Carolina's House's budget proposal, and they'll likely vote next week. And then in theory, if things stay on track, timeline-wise, the North Carolina House and North Carolina Senate will put together and vote on a final budget in June, hopefully in time for the new fiscal year on July 1st. So that brings us up to the current moment in our state budget process. And so on the next slide, we are asking folks to tell our lawmakers, tell the North Carolina General Assembly to stop income tax cuts for the wealthy few and profitable corporations. And this link will take you to a petition that you can sign asking our lawmakers to keep the corporate income tax, to preserve that really important source of revenue so that we can fund the things that our communities need and deliver that well-being budget for North Carolinians. And then I think at this point, I pass it back to Alexandra.
Great. Thank you, Sally. The Senate budget is certainly unacceptable for North Carolina. It makes choices that will block opportunity for so many communities. And I think one thing we know is that there are so many priorities people have for their communities, for their families, for their neighbors, that are being missed because of the fixation on cutting income taxes for the wealthy and profitable corporations. And as we move through the budget process, which I've tried to share some links in addition to the Choose Communities, right now is a critical time to make your voice heard. We encourage you to reach out to the North Carolina House members that represent you to urge them to pause the tax cuts, to take a different approach than what the Senate put forward in their budget, and to hold the line in future debates as the budget draws through June. Um, to dig in deeper, though, I think we're so excited to be in partnership with the groups who are here tonight to share more of their perspective on the budget and the budget decisions, specifically in the Senate budget, that will block opportunity and progress for our communities. I'm going to introduce each of them. They're going to come on and share a little bit more about their work. I just want to remind everyone we will have time for questions, so please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom or top of your screen, wherever it may appear. And we'll try to answer those and create some space for live question and answer as well. So again, tonight we're so excited to welcome our partners to share their perspective and their insights on the budget and what it means for our communities across North Carolina. I'm excited to welcome first Stephanie Smith, who's organizing manager with National Domestic Workers Alliance here in North Carolina, who just had an amazing event on Monday, a day without childcare, where folks joined together to make clear just how essential childcare is to our communities. Next, we'll hear from John Tillman and Richard Hooker, founders and board member of the Hub Coalition. I've had the opportunity to work with John and Richard over the years, and they bring amazing passion and ingenuity to the work of making sure that every business owner is connected to the information and resources to make their business grow, thrive in their community. And it's an exciting and important model that we need to be supporting here in North Carolina to level the playing field and to make sure every business has a chance at success. Finally, we'll hear from Grady O'Brien, who is Water Policy Manager at the NC Conservation Network. We've learned so much from the NC Conservation Network and from Grady in particular um, over the course of this budget cycle and many budget cycles as to how the state can support the infrastructure and the environmental protections we need to live in a beautiful state like we do with so many natural resources and so much potential to be resilient in the face of climate disasters. So very excited to have each of you here. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Steph, is it okay if we start with you?
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. I'm happy to be here, and I'm great to be in partnership with the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center. We sit in many meetings with the NC Child Care Coalition. So learning about the budget and tax North Carolina is very knowledgeable. I love learning about this and seeing the numbers. So thank you guys for that amazing work that you guys do. So yes, I am Stephanie Smith. I am an organizer manager with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and I am also a family child care provider here in Durham, North Carolina. And so, as Alexandra said, we just had came from amazing big action on Monday, where it was the National Day Without Childcare on Monday. And here we hosted in North Carolina the North Carolina Day Without Childcare. So, as many of you may know, North Carolina child care system is in a big crisis. Over the past 2 years, we've seen child care centers close across the state, particularly in rural communities like Rockingham County, where 9 programs were forced to close their doors. Without urgent and permanent solutions, more closures are sure to follow, leaving working families without care and providers without a pathway forward. So that is one of the reasons, the main reason why we closed our doors on May 12th and took action for the Day Without Childcare. And so we wanted to make sure that we were demanding a bold investment in the childcare infrastructure for our families and the economy that we depend on. And so this year, our campaign is focused on winning long-term investment and policies to stabilize and strengthen the childcare system in North Carolina. And a few of our demands, which is all right, mainly it's two that I will touch bases on here that we are focusing on are a statewide child care subsidy reimbursement floor. We are asking legislators to invest $220 million into implementing the most recent child care market rate survey by investing this funding, this $220 million, to set a statewide subsidy floor. So none of the counties in North Carolina is left behind. So right now, the child care subsidy floor is staggered. So rural counties, they receive a reimbursement from child care subsidy, which is very low, as opposed to more counties that have more funding and richer counties, I would say, their uh, their reimbursement rate is higher. And so we want to make sure that state subsidy floor is across the board the same and stable across the board. So rural counties won't feel the the pain behind that. And so childcare subsidy rates have historically lagged behind the most recent market rates, and NC rates being paid out right now are still based on 2021's market rate. So here we are in 2025, and providers across North Carolina are still being paid based upon the rates that were surveyed back in 2021. That's not okay because, as you guys know, the cost of food is has increased drastically. The overhead cost to run a business and operate a childcare center has increased drastically, and most importantly, the cost of care for children has increased drastically. So running a business off of rates from 2021 is not okay. Running a business off of rates for 2023 while we're still in 25 is still not okay. So but that's what we're asking for right now, to invest that $220 million for based on the childcare market rates from 2023 and the current cost of care. Our second demand is childcare for the childcare workforce. And we are asking our representatives to invest $60 million into that. An investment of $60 million to provide subsidy for the childcare workforce. Many of our childcare workers who are teachers, family childcare providers, they work in these programs, but they can't afford to pay childcare on their own because they're not being paid um, a a living wage. And so we are asking for investment in subsidized care for early educators. To create some type of pilot, a statewide pilot, to offer the child care workforce a benefit to cover child care in for their children to either pay it in full or reduce the cost of childcare. Because if you have children at home, you know the cost of childcare is literally more than a mortgage payment. So we want at least 14, we want to at least have $60 million that is non-recurring funds that will help to subsidize the childcare workforce for childcare. And those are a couple of our demands. And of course, you guys know around protecting Medicaid. We also want to demand North Carolina to protect Medicaid. Thousands of child care workers and their families have they serve rely on Medicaid for their health care. Proposed federal cuts would jeopardize care access and risk up to 25% of North Carolina's state budget. If these cuts go through, the state may be forced to reduce funding for childcare, education, and other vital services. So, services like Head Start, NC Pre-K, all of those things may be impacted. So, we want to make sure that Medicaid is protected in our state. And then, of course, lastly, oppose harmful work reporting requirements. When work requirements are tied to Medicaid and other benefits, care workers, especially those with unpredictable schedules, are often the first to lose coverage. We're standing against these requirements, which punish the very people that who we hold our care system together. So we want to make sure that we oppose harmful work. When the General Assembly extended their child care stabilization funds through the early part of 2025. We were grateful for those funds, but those funds are now gone, and we need permanent solutions, equitable funding, and not just temporary relief. So don't just put a little stamp on it and say, okay, we fixed the problem, because as long as children are being born, childcare is needed. And our children, as we know, it's a kind of a cliche term, but it's a real term. Children are our future, and it starts with early childhood education. And so that is what our ask is from for the budget for 2025 budget. And if you guys have any questions that you may want to ask me, I'm going to drop my email and phone number in the chat. And feel free, we can talk offline to learn more. And you can pick my brain about how we came up with these numbers and yeah, and how you can get involved in these actions. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you, Steph. That was great.
Yeah.
Richard and John, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm not sure if Mr. Hooker is still logged in. If he was, I'd let him go first. But since I don't see him, I'll go on and speak a little bit about the closure of the hub office. That's what we wanted to speak about. I'm John Tillman. I'm a board chair of the Hub Coalition. And our mission is really to build an alliance of diverse organizations that work collaboratively to create economic opportunities for historically underutilized businesses. And we support the Hub office as well as we support historically underutilized businesses. So we really feel that it's going to be very difficult for minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses to continue to get contracts if the Senate goes ahead and closes the Hub office. So the removal of the Hub office would disproportionately affect historically marginalized groups. It would reduce economic competitiveness and signal a retreat from the inclusive economic development in North Carolina. Its impact would be felt across public contracting, community development, and the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem. And really, there are about 5 different categories where the impact would be felt. And I want to touch on each of those briefly. First, there would be an economic impact of closing the Hub office, but there'd also be a social equity impact, just number 2. Third, I want to talk a little bit about the institutional or the policy impacts. And fourth, there's a political and perception impact for our state. And number 5, workforce and employment would be impacted. And let me talk just a little bit about how each of those categories would be affected. So first, the economic impact. Certainly minority and women-owned businesses. There will be reduced access to contracts. Hub certification often provides access to state contracts and procurement opportunities. It eliminates, if it's eliminated, then that would make it harder for minority and women-owned businesses to compete. And please understand some of the talking points from the Republican senators is that there are quotas, but they're not quotas. but there is education that's provided by the hub office so that businesses know about opportunities, and there's training and those types of things. There'd also be the loss of visibility. Without a centralized certification and advocacy, these businesses may struggle to gain recognition in the state procurement process. There'd be a revenue decline. Less access to state-funded projects could result in lower revenues, and ultimately it could affect businesses closing. In terms of the state economy, decreased competition, and this is something that we don't think about. Having hubs bid on projects actually increases the number of bidders, and it actually allows the state to get services at a reduced rate often. If those hubs go away and there's less support for hubs to for the bidding for state contracts, then certainly if there's only one main bidder or larger agencies, there's that opportunity for prices to be increased. So the state stands to lose. There's also the potential for legal challenges, of course. If there's a removal results in discriminatory outcomes, then certainly that could lead to lawsuits and what have you. But let's move on to the social equity impacts. Widening of the wealth gap. The hub office helps address systemic barriers to economic participation. Its removal may exacerbate racial and gender wealth disparities. Undermining economic mobility. Entrepreneurs from historically marginalized groups may face greater difficulty scaling their businesses, and that's very important. Scaling your business means you're able to bring on new employees. So that's community development. There could be reduced investment in underserved areas. Hub certified businesses often locate and operate in economically disadvantaged areas. Their decline might impact the local economy and local economic activity in those areas. Also, there is an erosion of trust. Communities of colors and women entrepreneurs may see this as a rollback. No, do see this as a rollback of equity efforts, undermining trust in our government. And that's just tragic. Institutional and policy impacts. Government contracting process. Without a central hub office, individual agencies may need to create their own inclusion system. But here's a fact. Not only is there the proposal to close the hub office, but also there are civil penalties for activities that advocate for diverse businesses participating. So this could really cause a loss of, even those buyers or folks that are hiring and considering hiring will think twice about it. Am I going to be sued, or is this going to be turned in or reported? So it could have even broader impacts than just the direct impact. So there could be indirect impact as well. Let's talk a little bit about the political and the perception impact. Nationally, there could be a negative national perception. With the removal of the hub office might signal to national investors and diverse entrepreneurs that North Carolina is not a place that you want to locate your business. Also, it could be a deterrent to minority entrepreneurs. States perceived as unsupportive of equity may struggle to attract diverse talent and diverse businesses. Additionally, workforce and employment impacts. Fewer jobs. We all know that small businesses are the backbone of North Carolina's economy. So if we're not supporting the growth and sustainability of these historically underutilized businesses, then they're not in positions to employ. And so that's a difficult impact. Also, indirect job losses. Suppliers, contractors, and local communities that rely on hubs may also suffer economically. So it's not just the businesses themselves, but there's a chain. So again, the removal of the hub office would disproportionately affect historically marginalized groups. it would reduce economic competitiveness, and it would be a signal that we're retreating. We're going backwards. And as a state, we don't want to go backwards.
Thank you so much, John. That was well said, and it is so connected to so many issues and goals we have as a state to make sure people have the information, to make sure we have a competitive environment, and to make sure we're getting at those systemic inequities that have blocked the full potential of our state. I did see Richard on, and I wanted to make sure that, Richard, if you did want to say a few words, we would love to hear from you too.
Well, certainly. Let me see. Yeah, I'm off. Yes, certainly. John gave a very compelling case as to why the hub office need to be, retained. Unfortunately, I understand that the Senate did pass the budget that included the elimination of the hub office, and now goes to the House, and we have to continue to lobby those legislators to ensure that they understand the value and the importance of the hub office. As John alluded to, as so many the legislators seem to believe, is that it is seemed to be like a quota program or set aside or preferential treatment, and that is not the case. As a matter of fact, when you look at the data, you see continuous underrepresentation and underperformance of our hub businesses as it relates to their white counterparts. I remember when the hub office was instituted back in 1999 under Governor Hunt, there was an aspiration goal of 10%. Even today, we have not achieved that aspiration goal. I think the last data points showed that hub businesses were only 6% of total spending, for the state. So if you look at the spending 2 years ago, I think the state of North Carolina spent over $10 billion in construction needs, as one example. And of those, only 6% of those went to minority businesses. Because we do have white women-owned businesses included in that data points, when you add white women and the major corporations or companies, you're looking at almost 97% of all contracts and all state spending goes toward that segment of the business population. So as you can see, there's still a continuous underrepresentation, disparity, and underperformance of our minority businesses or hub businesses, in the overall spending in the state. And so John indicated the value of the hub office. Obviously, those point to, from a numerical analytical standpoint, the value of the need to continue the hub office. And so the bottom line, as John alluded to, preserving and maintaining the hub office will work to help with state spending. It will add to innovation. It would expand the economic base that will provide for more innovation and more services offered. It'll help reduce competition. It will, if they retain it, I should say, it would reduce competition. Obviously, it would hurt small businesses, and it will weaken our economy. So those are critical pieces that supports why the hub office need to be retained. And as we continue to move forward to advocate for the support of hub businesses, for those who know the impact that you have in your own community, what that hub businesses provide, I would also encourage you to contact your legislators and encourage them to do what they can to help support the need for the hub office, which has over the years proven to be a contributor to the economic impact of our state.
Thank you so much, Richard. And such an important point about the role that hub businesses play in communities across the state. Every community has hub businesses, and I encourage you all to connect with those businesses as well, and make sure that they're engaged in this work to keep the office available, sharing information, training, and other supports to business leaders. Grady, we'd love to hear from you about the work and what you saw in the Senate budget around the environment.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Grady O'Brien. I work for North Carolina Conservation Network. As Alexandra said, my title is Water Policy Manager, which is one facet of my work, but I'm also a lobbyist, so I spend a lot of time at the General Assembly, probably more than anybody should. But did dive into the budget, obviously. It's a very important document. I want to highlight a few things. One, I think the headline grabber was around a Senate Bill 261, which had been passed independently as a standalone bill previously in the session, but then was stuck into the budget pretty much word for word. And this was the Energy Security and Affordability Act was the title of it. But it did two kind of really concerning things. One is that it repealed our state's emissions reduction target for 2030, which was a 70% reduction in emissions from 2005 levels. We also have a 2050 net zero target, but this was kind of the stair step to help get us there. But we're already kind of on track to miss that, which is discouraging. But this bill would take it away entirely so that there wasn't even any sort of uh, initiative to meet that progress. Um, the other kind of concerning part of that bill is that it would allow a utility like Duke Energy to recover costs on facilities that are currently being constructed, are not in use yet, not generating anything, and may not ever generate anything, but recover the construction costs for those through increases in rates and increases in rates outside of how rate cases are normally heard. So normally Duke has to go to the Utilities Commission to ask for their rates to be increased to cover the cost of, whether they're buying new facilities or what have you. This would say they wouldn't have to go through that process to recover this funding for assets that, again, are not necessarily even online, not giving us anything. And we've seen this in other states in the Southeast, like Georgia, like South Carolina, and oftentimes ratepayers are basically left holding the bag for upwards of billions of dollars, if it's a certain type of facility. So that was a very concerning bill as a standalone. To see it in the budget as kind of I guess, another time over of the Senate saying, we're going to send this to the House, was very concerning from an environmental aspect and something we certainly want to see come out on the House side and are hoping that they're not ready to include when they unveil their version any minute now. A couple of other things I'll touch on is the budget across many departments, state departments made cuts. It did that to the Department of Environmental Quality as well. Obviously, a well-staffed and well-resourced Department of Environmental Quality is important for kind of regulatory protection of air, water, land. And as Sally mentioned, oftentimes the General Assembly cuts vacant positions, which is troubling enough. Just because a position's vacant doesn't mean it's unimportant. It just might be that, there's a lot of turnover or non-competitive salaries. In this case, the General Assembly or the Senate budget targeted very specific filled positions. So they cut the department's Office of Environmental Education, many positions related to environmental justice initiatives, deputy secretaries for infrastructure, policy, public affairs. So they really went after kind of very specific, very filled positions that are doing what we believe is important work, and to help the capacity of the department. At the same time, while taking positions away from the Department of Environmental Quality, they decided to give new staff to something called the Environmental Management Commission, which is the rulemaking body for the department, which has become more conservative over the past few years because of who is appointed to that commission. So they've essentially tried to kind of create what I call like a fiefdom or a shadow agency of folks who are much more in line with the legislature's picture of environmental protection instead of what a cabinet agency with expertise and appointed by the governor over here at the Department of Environmental Quality. So kind of fracturing those two things, pushing a wedge in between them when they're really supposed to work hand in hand, is concerning from our perspective on how we do environmental regulation, environmental protection correctly. The last thing I'll note is a slightly more positive. Folks have probably heard about forever chemicals like PFAS, PFAS. There is some good funding in there for further research on PFAS and funding for grants to water utilities who are going to be under immense pressure over the next few years to try to deal with these things to protect their customers from drinking polluted water. Although there's been some federal backtracking on just what they'll be held to recently, but still, there's lots of utilities that have already taken steps to spend lots and lots of money for treatment upgrades to make sure that their customers are not drinking water that has PFAS in it. Um, if there aren't grants like this in a budget, or if there isn't help from the state, all of those upgrades, which can be upwards of 50, 75, $100 million in treatment, can be passed directly onto ratepayers, which of course only makes bill affordability a bigger issue. So we're hopeful that that money, in any version of the budget, remains in there so that these water systems at least have somewhere to go to maybe get some help through grants or loans to make these upgrades that are going to be very badly needed as we keep finding PFAS in our water supply. So those are kind of the big ticket things. I hope that helps, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Grady. And thank you again to Steph, Richard, John, Grady. It's so tremendous to have your perspective. I think it makes really clear how important the budget choices are to our everyday lives in North Carolina and communities. We have some time for questions. I see one in the chat that we'll get to. If you have questions, please feel free to add those in here. I think the one thing I'll just continue to emphasize in our work on the budget right now is there are still opportunities. You heard a few of them about opportunities to really push the House to take a different approach to make sure that the final budget that our state adopts really considers what people need to be well in community, what they need to stay on the job with affordable childcare, what the businesses need to expand in our communities, and what our communities need to drink safe water and breathe safe air. So what we know is that the Senate proposal has really set up across the board a vision where North Carolina will have rigged rules for the benefit of very large corporations, very large and profitable corporations, and the wealthy few, all while our communities and our families are not getting the support and opportunity we we need and deserve as members in of this wonderful state. So we have a question in the chat. I'll check again to see if we have any in the Q&A box, but this one is for Grady. I don't know, Bob, if you'd like to come off mute. I think you can, maybe you can't do that. I can
Yeah.
read it.
I'm happy to.
Okay. Yeah.
So, for those that didn't see, Bob had asked what's being done for private well owners in terms of PFAS. I know for anybody who knows the story, Chemours in Fayetteville is the biggest culprit of discharging PFAS, or at least the one that's had to face legal ramifications through a special order of consent. Part of that was for affected well owners in the area. Chemours has to do well testing and provide remediation for those well owners within the area that PFAS was released around them. For others who might be outside of that geographic scope, there is something called the Bernard Allen Drinking Water Fund, which helps folks with contamination problems like this. From what I remember in the Senate budget, I don't think there was any increase in funding for that, though, this time around. There's usually some sort of additional appropriation for that year to year, but I don't believe I saw that this year. So that is kind of a troubling part. Um, and then a follow-up, Bob asked how we can push back on Senate Bill 261, and I'll just be an echo to my other panelists. Make a call into your legislator now to tell them, this isn't what you want to see, either standalone or in the budget. Those I used to be one of the people who fielded those calls. Those calls matter, those emails matter. Maybe not individually, but as you reach critical mass, you kind of understand, okay, this is a problem for my constituents. So definitely voice that to whoever your representative and senator are as this budget process goes on, because again, as Sally so helpfully pointed out, they say they're going to be done by June, but they won't be done by June. So there's still time for you to make those calls and let them know how you feel about all these things.
Thanks so much, Grady. That was great. Um, I want to make sure as we close out to just invite you all to join us in the next few weeks as we think about the ways that our budget should reflect the priorities people have for their communities. I want to thank our panelists again for sharing their expertise. I want to thank my colleague Sally for her amazing in-depth analysis of the budget proposals that are coming our way. So stay tuned next week for her work on the House budget. I also want to thank my colleague Mel, who's behind the scenes and supporting on the event tonight, and our interpreters from Tilday. So as we close, we hope you'll join us. We want to hear from you about what well-being means to you. You can do that at ncbudget.org/economic well-being. Now's the time to start emailing and calling. You heard Grady. It does matter. It does make a difference. Email and call your NC House members to pause the income tax cuts, to prioritize the investments that you've heard about tonight, that you care about, that you know matter for your community. Please take a moment to do that and share those links with your networks. And then we have to keep focus as well at the same time on the federal budget proposal. So contacting your federal representatives, and particularly Senators Tillis and Budd, to reject current plans to cut Medicaid and SNAP to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthy. You can do that at ncbudget.org/people first. Before we close, I think it's important in these times to be in community and to recognize that we do have power to lift our voices, to make clear our priorities, and to demand a better vision for our state. I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you, with this distinguished panel who has so much expertise on the policy details that we need to be following. We hope you'll stay connected with us. Please reach out if we can provide more information. If you can take a moment before you log off to give us feedback about tonight's event, we would love to hear from you. We're trying to make sure that we're responding to the topics and strategies and tools that you want to have to stay engaged and connected to this important policy process. So thank you very much. I'll leave that screen up. We hope you have a wonderful evening, a restful weekend, and we look forward to being in community with you through this budget fight and beyond. Thank you, everyone.